Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Witness and I'm your host, Quatrina Hossain. Over this past weekend, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Pakistan on what was, I think, her fourth official visit to Pakistan in that capacity. This time her visit came at a time when relations between Pakistan and the United States had plunged to what was an extremely new low in terms of the ties between the two countries. What impact did Secretary Clinton's visit have on Pakistani policymakers? How was it perceived here in Pakistan? And most importantly, is the United States now clearer on what Pakistan's position is? Is Pakistan more clear on what the American position is? These are important issues because the linchpin of the relationship between these two countries is Afghanistan. And what happens in Afghanistan, or what should happen in Afghanistan, will clearly be in many ways defined and shaped by the relationship between Pakistan and the United States as well. So we are going to explore the impact of Secretary Clinton's visit here to Pakistan. We would have actually done this program yesterday, but of course, as many of you know, in fact all of you probably know, that Begum Nusrat Bhutto's passing yesterday was something that we believed was something that deserved a tribute from the Witness team. So today we focus in on the issue of the relationship between Pakistan and the United States. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Or is it just in a holding pattern? Allow me to introduce my guest here in the studio. My first guest is Dr. Riffat Hussain. He is a defense analyst, a foreign policy analyst, as well as a professor of security studies at Quatrina University. My second guest today is Mr. Asif Ezdi. He is a political and foreign policy analyst and of course has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Germany and Denmark. I thank you both for joining me here today. And Dr. Hussain, Secretary Clinton's visit, in what way do you think it was different from previous visits, and has it helped in improving the relationship between Pakistan and America?
I think it did help arrest the free fall trend that one had witnessed in terms of the bilateral ties between two countries, particularly after Osama bin Laden's assassination, and then we had accusations that were hurled by Admiral Mike Mullen, saying to the fact that the Haqqani group was acting as the veritable arm of the ISI. So that created a lot of bad blood, and there was an impression that both countries were actually heading towards some kind of a rupture.
Right.
And I think her visit has arrested that trend towards free fall, and her tone was also very different. There was emphasis more on commonality of interest. She in fact said that 95% of the time now the Pakistanis and the Americans actually agree in terms of devising a strategy as to what is it that needs to be done to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan. So I think her tone was positive, and there were no faux pas, and I think the optics were very good. Now the question is that has that led to the narrowing of differences between Pakistan and United States? I think that is something that is still in the future. We have to see as to what kind of a framework for cooperation both countries have been able to evolve to deal with the situation in Afghanistan, because for the Americans the key concern is not only to have an honorable exit from Afghanistan, but also leave behind a structure which will not collapse once the American forces withdraw,
which is a major concern for Pakistan
for Pakistan as well. And of course the Pakistanis are interested that the Americans should give up the use of force and their total reliance on the use of kinetic force to weaken the Taliban, and the Pakistanis think that the American use of force has run out of its utility and it is now time to get back to the negotiating table.
Mr. Ezdi, I'll bring you into this conversation here as well, and the but, because I want to pick up a little bit from where Dr. Riffat left off. And the but here is that America still wants to have the strategy of talk and fight at the same time. And in fact, Secretary Clinton, in one of her interactions, actually said something to the effect of the fact that General David Petraeus used that strategy in Iraq and that it worked there. And General Petraeus now, of course, was on this visit with her. He is now the head of the CIA. Do you think this policy of the United States of trying to the stick and the carrot, if you want to put it that way, do you think it's going to work?
It hasn't worked so far. And I don't think it's going to work, if the Americans expect that the Taliban are going to join the talks because they're getting a good beating. I don't think that's going to happen. the fact is that it's the Americans who are almost begging the Taliban to come to the negotiating table. It's not like the Taliban suing for peace. It's the other way around. The Americans are working to a timetable. They have a plan to withdraw their troops by the end, a certain number of their troops by the end of next year, and then by 2014, the rest, leaving behind, of course, a substantial presence. So they have a timetable, and they cannot, I think, go back on that timetable. And as the Taliban have been saying, the Americans have the watch, we have the time. So the time is on the Taliban side. The Americans have to continue pulling out, and as they begin, and they have begun their pullout, as the pullout proceeds, then the American military clout is going to be less and less effective. So I think it's a situation which for the Americans really is not going to bring any victory. So when Clinton was here, the emphasis was, I think, not so much or not exclusively on Pakistan taking action against the Haqqani group, but also getting Pakistan's cooperation on the reconciliation talks. So it was not a one-track message, but a two-track message. They need to start these talks, and they realize that Pakistan can play a helping hand, play a role in bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table.
But now here's a tricky question here, if I can take it further than that, bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table, helping in the negotiation process. Dr. Riffat, as Mr. Ezdi just pointed out, time is on the side of the Taliban. What precludes, and I'm sorry to be sort of the doomsday person here, but what precludes the Taliban from simply agreeing, even signing off on some kind of settlement, and then simply going back to war once the American troops are gone?
I think I would beg to differ with Ezdi Saab's assessment. I think it's not a question that the Taliban see that victory is around the corner. I think you have a situation of strategic stalemate. The Taliban cannot force the Americans to withdraw. Americans will withdraw because of their own domestic compulsions, because of their financial constraints and a whole host of other reasons. But the Americans certainly cannot defeat the Taliban. So have a situation of strategic stalemate. Now the question is who is going to blink first. So in that sense, Taliban sense that that the time is on their side. It is, after all, it is their country. So they actually win by not losing, while the Americans cannot stay in Afghanistan forever. So
what does this mean for us?
Well, this essentially means for us is that we have a very small window of opportunity to come up with a plan in which once the Americans begin to withdraw their troops, the transition government, whatever that transition government would look like, must not push Afghanistan back to the kind of violent chaos that prevailed in that country before the Taliban took over. So I think it is that commonality of interest which is now driving both Pakistan and United States to work together.
And that's what's making me very queasy, personally. I mean, I really don't approve of the Taliban and what they did in Afghanistan, but my bigger fear than that, because the Taliban in Afghanistan is up to the Afghan people, as we keep saying, but my biggest fear is that a Taliban government in Afghanistan could perhaps increase Talibanization in Pakistan. How real is my fear on that front, Dr. Riffat?
I think that's I think that's a very genuine and that's a very real fear. So therefore, I would argue that it's not in Pakistan's interest to let the Taliban regain power. But regaining power is very different from giving the Pashtuns, who are the major ethnic group, their due share in the government in Afghanistan. But the Karzai government, because it has such a narrow base, because it's essentially a government which is led notionally led by a Pashtun, but essentially it's an alliance of all the non-Pashtun elements. So therefore, it's not a viable government. So that's why
not viable for whom?
Not viable in terms of
not representing.
Of course, not representing, and then also not being able to sustain itself without external props. So once the external props are gone, then you will have Taliban clamoring for a share in the power, and their due share in the power arrangement. And I think that is something which is a huge gain for the Taliban, because Taliban know that whatever structures the Karzai government will inherit from the American military presence will be there in such a America will have such a substantial presence that they will ensure that the Karzai government does not lose out to the Taliban. So I don't think that once the Americans withdraw their forces, Karzai government or whatever regime or transition mechanism that replaces it will be so weakened that it is going to be an easy walkover for the Taliban. I don't think it's going to happen that way.
Mr. Ezdi, should Pakistan be part of any process which involves negotiating with the Taliban in Afghanistan? What impact would that have on Pakistan's own war against terrorism, against our own version of the Taliban, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and its offshoots?
The first point is that Pakistan does not have as much influence on the Taliban as is made out to be sometimes.
We saw that in 2001.
Yeah. So we can give our advice to the extent that they are willing to take an advice from anyone, because they are very independent minded and they do what they think is in their interest or the Afghan interest. But we have certain links, and I think we should use them and try to persuade them to enter into a process of talks. So the Americans are encouraged to leave. And the second point I think I want to make is that the Americans will leave behind a presence, a substantial presence, 25,000 soldiers or so, which is to sustain or to preserve or keep alive a government which is headed by Karzai or its successor. But I think that government will be seen by Taliban and many other Afghans as a foreign imposition on Afghanistan. Like happened in the Soviet days, you had a government which was imposed by the foreign invading army, and that government could never command popular support. So any government which depends on the American forces for its survival is going to be a very unpopular government.
You see, this is, I totally understand what both of you are saying over here. Where in this whole setup, and Mr. Ezdi, I'll put this to you first, where in this whole setup are we talking about, or is anyone ever even considering what we want in Pakistan and how much influence there is? Right now, the Americans are saying that there's safe havens in Pakistan, and the Haqqani network uses the safe havens in Pakistan to cross over to Afghanistan. My fear is that then there will be Taliban safe havens in Afghanistan, and they'll be crossing over to Pakistan to bring about their version of Talibanization in Pakistan. I mean, can it happen, or am I just freaking out for no reason?
I can tell you that the Indians, the Indian fear is quite the reverse. What they fear is that if there is if the Taliban have a share of power in Kabul, then they might broker a peace agreement between the Pakistani Taliban and the government of Pakistan. So Pakistan will then have peace within the country, which is what Indians don't want. So their fear is quite the reverse of what you are saying. They think that a Taliban government or Taliban having a share of the government in Kabul would help Pakistan make a kind of a peace agreement or a deal with the TTP, which will result in peace in Pakistan. So that's what the
peace in Pakistan. Yeah. Wow, what a concept.
My take on that is that a lot of it will actually depend on how do we negotiate the transition mechanism in the wake of the American.
Can I just interrupt you here for a minute?
Yeah.
Is it absolutely essential that the Taliban should be part of the solution in Afghanistan? They are, after all, a new entity in the landscape if you look at it. They emerged in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. Are they now an integral part of the political framework in Afghanistan?
Well, whether we like it or not, they are an important stakeholder. Because,
we can't wish them away?
You can't wish them away. They control large chunks of territory in the south and the east, and also central parts of Afghanistan. And before they were dislodged by the Americans forcibly in November 2001, they controlled more than 80% of the territory.
That's right.
So therefore, they have tested power. And whether we like it or not, they do have substantial support amongst the Pashtuns, and I would say even some of the non-Pashtun minorities who have been, dealt a brutal deal by the Northern Alliance people. So therefore, I think the Taliban have ruled the country, and they have men in arms, and they have a fighting force of maybe 20 to 20,000 people, and they have withstood the onslaught of the Americans and the NATO forces. So therefore, I think they have to be made a part and parcel of a future power sharing arrangement, because without their presence you will have them as disgruntled factors, and then they will looking more and more towards the Pashtun speaking, Pashtun majority areas of Pakistan to sustain themselves, and that is something that is certainly not good for Pakistan.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a short commercial break. When we return, what is in Pakistan's interest? How much should we be involved with the negotiation process in Afghanistan? We will explore, of course, some of the things that Secretary Clinton said to clear up earlier misconceptions. And in today's newspapers, for example, there was a report that Secretary Clinton threatened Pakistan. Well, that has been denied by the US Embassy. So we will also, of course, talk about the fact that what impact do inflammatory headlines have? Even President Karzai is trying to say that he's been misquoted by an interview he gave to a private channel. We will talk about this and more after a short break. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Witness. Now, of course, some newspapers in Pakistan said that Hillary Clinton, in an interview with the Bloomberg news agency, threatened Pakistan with dire consequences. The American Embassy has issued a statement on that. I'd like to read that to you. In fact, they say that this was not, the Secretary Clinton did not threaten Pakistan. And the quote of her October 22nd interview was, this is, I is of course referring to Secretary Clinton, I have made it clear that there will be dire consequences for Pakistan as well as Afghanistan if this threat from the terrorist networks is not contained, at the very least because there's no way that any government in Islamabad can control these groups. So I think it's fairly clear that Secretary Clinton was not telling Pakistan that there were going to be dire consequences from the United States. Dr. Riffat, I think we can agree on that was not what Secretary Clinton said in this interview.
I think quite the contrary. What she was doing was expressing her apprehension that if Pakistanis are unable to contain the threat of extremism and terrorism, either single-handedly or in joint cooperation with the United States, the consequences for Pakistan and Afghanistan and for the peace in the region are going to be devastating.
Yeah.
So I think we're absolutely right. I mean, we all agree on that.
We all agree on that.
We all agree on that.
What kind of impact? Yes, Mr.
In diplomacy, that's the way a threat is given. You don't say that we'll do this to you if you don't do that. You put it in a language in which you convey the message, but don't use directly.
But then would the American Embassy then have issued the denial immediately?
No.
That looked to me like, because normally the threat is there, like Mullen made that statement.
The American Embassy has stated the facts, stated exactly what Hillary Clinton said. But the message can be different from the precise words.
Okay.
I'm not trying to say that she was threatening Pakistan with consequences, dire consequences, but what I mean is that one should not go simply by the text. By the word, by the text.
But do you think the media sometimes adds to the feeding frenzy?
Well, certainly. In this case, they did. In this case, they did.
Because let's face it. Whenever we have covered events between Pakistan and India, the media frenzy that surrounds any meeting between the leaders of Pakistan and India, I've covered most of them. Sometimes it becomes chaotic because of, and when you're trying to basically report facts, it becomes very difficult to report the facts. Now I'm beginning to fear that the Pakistan-America equation is going the same way. Should we be doing something differently, we the media?
I think what we need to be doing is that the statements that we put as banner headlines or as as headlines, whether it is the news bulletin or the newspapers, I think those statements need to be put in context. And I think the American Embassy has done, I think for the first time, a wise thing by actually providing the context in which the remarks were made.
Yeah.
And if you were to parse her words, I agree with Ezdi Saab that one way of looking at this is that because the Americans wanted Pakistanis to act against these groups, so now the dire consequences is being used as an argument to actually support pressure on Pakistan.
Well,
so that's a very cynical way of really looking at it. Okay. But if you want to read it that way, you can. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Ezdi, let me also put one other thing to you. Secretary Clinton had a town hall meeting, the famous mother-in-law statement made there, and for the record, the woman who asked that question about the mother-in-law relationship, thumbs up. But because that just added some humor in many ways to the whole relationship. But Secretary Clinton was at pains in all her meetings with the media, with Foreign Minister Kerr, to repeatedly say that the Haqqani network and the whole mystery that shrouds that whole situation. She was fairly forthcoming when I was reading those transcripts. What was your assessment of that? And basically, you know, the points, I mean, I can go into the points with you if you like, but what was your assessment?
Yeah, I think she was not here making the threats in the kind of language which Mullen and others have used in the past. And if any threats are to be delivered, it's done privately. This was not a mission to make threats. This was a mission to get Pakistan's cooperation against the Haqqani group.
So are you saying that it was double speak all over again?
I wouldn't say it was double speak. I think they realized that they cannot push Pakistan to take military action against the Haqqani group. This is now
they accept
that. Now what they want is intelligence sharing. They want us to deny supply to them, deny the flow of money to them. So they're not asking us to start a military action against, a military campaign against the Haqqani group, but in other ways, short of military action. Is that a fair demand?
Pardon? Is that a fair demand of America to say that we shouldn't give, give them military support, or we shouldn't give them financial support, we should cut off?
I think we are not giving any financial support. There is no financial support being given by the government of Pakistan. Or by
I meant we should cut off whatever inflows they have. Do you think that that is a fair demand for Washington to be making, that Pakistan should help, the Pakistan government and the state should help isolate the Haqqani network?
I think in principle this is a fair demand to make. But this mission was not simply on the Haqqani group. It was also on getting us to cooperate in getting the Taliban to talk. Also, it was supposed to promote the new Silk Road project,
right,
which the Americans have come up with now, which is really a plan to make India the dominant power of South Asia and Central Asia. And this is a project which is going to be discussed in the Istanbul meeting next week,
right,
and also in the Bonn meeting next week. And I'm surprised that the government of Pakistan, I'm referring to the statement by the Minister of Commerce, and he said that the meeting of the Commerce Secretaries of India and Pakistan next month in India is going to discuss the question of Pakistan granting transit trade rights to India. When the minister says it's going to discuss something, because this is something which the Indians have always demanded.
Absolutely.
When we say we're discussing it, it actually means we accept it.
We're accepting it.
Yeah. So I don't know why Mr. Amin Fahim made this concession to the Indians, under whose pressure, without discussing it in the parliament, without putting it to the nation for discussion, without letting the media have expressed their opinion. This was given by, this is the concession given which the government is planning to give to the Indians without any reciprocity, just because the Americans have pressed us, because they think this is an essential element of the new Silk Road project that they have in mind. So I think it's largely our own governments failing.
Because granting them MFN status.
MFN status without a quid pro quo from the Indians, transit rights without a quid pro quo. And now at this meeting in Istanbul, the plan is to give Indians a predominant role in the planned economic cooperation arrangement for the entire region.
For the entire region. Yeah. And Dr. Riffat, if I can also add one, sure. I want you to comment on that, but also please talk about the fact that India is now going to be training the Afghan National Army and the police, and how excited Pakistan is about that prospect as well.
Well, I think going back to Hillary Clinton's visit and what the goals were, I think one of the key factors, the key phrase which actually came up not only a couple of times but several times, was that she insisted that we want Pakistan to squeeze the Haqqani network. Now, you can squeeze somebody, by arm twisting them. You can squeeze somebody by harassing them. You can squeeze somebody by cutting off, financial aid flows and things like that. Or you can squeeze somebody by putting out more intelligence about them. So I think, and then she, in the interview that she gave to the Bloomberg newspaper outlet, she also mentioned this, that there are non-military means of getting the same objective. So I think she has realized that it is now futile for the United States to continue to insist that the Pakistanis should take military action against Haqqani network. That's not going to happen. So I think grudgingly the Americans have come to accept that fact, but the goal remains the same, that let us squeeze them from both sides. I think that remains the key goal. The second thing that she, I think which was important, was that instead of demonizing the Haqqani network as something which the Americans will never negotiate with, for the first time the Americans have left the door open for the at least those elements in the Haqqani group who are interested in participating in the reconciliation process. Now, the question that you asked about this, that I think the New Silk Route initiative that she first mentioned when she had visited India in her speech in Chennai, and subsequently, that has been the constant refrain in most of her pronouncements when it comes to looking at peace and security issues in South Asia. I think it is much too early. Unless the situation in Afghanistan stabilizes, this New Silk Road initiative is not going to go really anywhere, because without Pakistan and Afghanistan and peace prevailing in Afghanistan, there can be no direct linkage through Pakistan-Afghanistan territory between South Asia and Central Asia. So she can talk about it, till the cows come home, but I don't think that this really has any promise without bringing peace on the ground in Afghanistan. Number one. Number two, I think the Americans, I think what Karzai government has done is by signing the strategic partnership agreement with India is that they have legitimized India's security role inside Afghanistan, because previously the world community was saying that India has a developmental role, they can help them develop the infrastructure and all that, but now in this agreement you have a very specific clause which says that the Afghan National Security Forces will be provided training by the Indians, and
so
they will also be given equipment.
Pakistan is livid about this.
So Pakistan is livid about this, and I think President Karzai in his interview to the Geo television tried to kind of address this Pakistani concern by saying that in case Pakistan get attacked by any other country, then the Afghans will stand by them.
Poor President Karzai is having to backtrack on that statement as well because of the pressure he got. Mr. Ezdi, this is a tricky part, of course, isn't it? Because again, Secretary Clinton was virtually dismissive of the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline, which Pakistan believes is critical to its energy needs, and she said Pakistan needs to find alternate means, and she talked about the fact that America is going to help provide 1,000 megawatts. But is really should America rather be in a position to dictate to Pakistan who our friends are and whom we should trade with and whom we should partner with?
No, of course not. But let me come back to the Karzai-Manmohan agreement. I think we shouldn't bother too much about it. There's nothing new in it. The Indians have for the last 60 years been trying to develop a relationship with the Afghan government because they want to encircle Pakistan. And this new agreement doesn't give them any new means to do that. So it was simply, for the Indians to assert that Afghanistan falls within our sphere of influence. They treat this as something which is within their sphere of influence.
Which is a little unfair because it's our backyard. We have to deal with the fallout of Afghan problems. They don't. We're the buffer in between the two countries. This is
not the age in which countries should be thinking of spheres of influence.
Yeah, exactly.
But India obviously does. And this is a term which was used by the Indian media itself, that India is losing its sphere of influence because Karzai might start talks with the Taliban. And in case that comes through and they have a share of the power in Kabul, then we lose that influence and we should try and regain our influence. So India regards Afghanistan as within its sphere of influence, which must be maintained.
A bit delusionary, isn't it?
Well, of course, it's for the Indians to think like they are a colonial power. They were colonized by the British for so many years, and maybe they want to
or the Mughal Empire, which stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal. But I do see that point, Mr. Ezdi, but I want you to also comment a little bit on, you said, of course not, America should not be interfering in our relationship with Iran, but they are.
But what they can do and what we should be demanding is, okay, but then let's have an agreement in which we get the nuclear cooperation from you in civilian
nuclear power or clean energy or something. I mean, give us an alternative.
No, not clean energy. We want nuclear power. We should be insisting on getting the same kind of deal which they gave to the Indians.
Why?
Why should Pakistan be the only country in the world which is under an embargo?
Yeah, India tested. We tested, India tested first, we tested.
And Indian nuclear program was based on stealing technology. They've given this technology for their nuclear power, civilian power, and they stole the technology for building a bomb. Pakistan never stole technology given to us by the Americans. We bought it on the international market. We broke their rules.
But quite illegally, I would say.
We didn't break any international law rules.
We didn't, for example, misuse what was given to us for energy.
We broke the domestic laws of some countries, but we did not break the international law. The Indians broke an international agreement. So they are guilty of breach of agreement. We are not.
I don't want to go into the politics of nuclear power versus other sources of generating power.
But I think the larger point that needs to be made is that as the Americans tell us that you should have no objection to what the Karzai government is trying to do in terms of a strategic relationship with India. Similarly, we should also tell the Americans that you should have no objection when we are trying to cooperate with Iran, which is our next door neighbor.
Absolutely.
And with which so we have to live as neighbors, and we have a whole history of cooperation with Iran. Now the Americans want us to support more the TAPI project, which is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, and then and not go ahead with the IPI. And IPI, the Indians sort of
pulled out already.
They pulled out
so it's
from
IP.
it. It is essentially IP, and the Americans should have absolutely no objections to this, because the Americans still think, and I think that is really so nothing but an illusion, that they can prevent Pakistan, or they can have Pakistan become part of what they are trying to develop as an anti-Iran consensus. Pakistan will never be part of that. Pakistan has made it absolutely clear. So I think if trade and energy is the wave of the future, then the Americans should be supporting all those projects which actually bring the region together. And I simply do not understand the logic that they have no objection to TAPI, but they have all the objections to India, to Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. It is really riddled with contradiction.
Riddled with contradictions. And Mr. Ezdi, let me now also go on to another topic which of course interests me. There has been a lot of speculation, and I particularly focus this question to you because of your expertise in the Foreign Office. As a lot of criticism about, criticism perhaps is not the right word, but a lot of speculation rather, about Hina Rabbani Kar as Pakistan's foreign minister. Was she tough enough? Was she able to articulate Pakistan's position firmly enough? And along with that, of course, everything we saw and heard, we saw the press conference that was jointly conducted by Ms. Kar and Secretary Clinton. Do you think Pakistan has forcefully put forward its case to the United States on all issues?
I have no doubt in the competence of Mrs. Kar. She's someone who takes her job very seriously. She reads the brief carefully, and she puts her mind to it, unlike many other ministers we have in the government. So I would not like to be criticizing her, although there has been
criticism.
A report
I think some of it has been unwarranted.
At the press conference, she was overawed maybe by Hillary Clinton. I don't think that's right.
Secretary Clinton has about 20 or 30 years of experience over her, which is a bit unfair, I think.
So I think
my real question is, do you think Hina Rabbani Kar was able to, because I've asked that question very specifically because I actually liked the speech she made at the United Nations. I thought she was pretty tough, pretty forthcoming. She may not be a very aggressive person, but her words, are they strong enough?
Well, in New York, she performed well. The interviews she gave, she was very firm and very forthcoming. But we shouldn't judge her just by one press conference. That was perhaps not the best performance by her. But
plus that whole cultural context of when you're the host and you've got a guest and there's a certain deference that you give to the guest. That's part of our culture. And I don't know if we should be mistreating
I don't think that should be an excuse. I mean, when you are in diplomacy, then you go by the rules of diplomacy, and you have to express your
the home ground advantage.
I think on that, it was quite evident that her inexperience was really writ large on that press conference. And of course, Hillary Clinton, she has been a presidential candidate. She has been, in the Senate,
Senator, the first lady,
and she has seen the whole world. So I think she had the advantage of experience on her side.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we return, the crucial question: has America made up its mind about what they want to do? We've talked in this program about previous events where America seemed to be changing the goalposts. Washington seemed to be unclear. We talked about a disconnect between the Pentagon and the State Department. Well, has Secretary Clinton been able to allay all those fears? We'll talk about that, but after a short break. Please stay with us. and welcome back to Witness. Before the break, I was talking about the fact that on this very platform, on this very show, we have talked several times about what seems to be a disconnect between what the United States says, what it wants, and what it does. And we've even speculated about a rift or some kind of disconnect between the Pentagon and the State Department, or the Defense Department and the State Department. Dr. Riffat, I think you were part of those discussions on a couple of cases. Do you think Washington has now made up its mind about what they really want and how they want to go about it, or do you still see a lack of clarity?
I think there is still a lack of clarity, but I think on Hillary Clinton's visit, the very fact that you had David Petraeus, you also had Mike Dempsey, all the major stakeholders, including Mark Grossman, they were all with her. And I think there was an effort to present some kind of a unified American view on some of these things, which I think is good. But I'm not sure that when it comes to the operational control of, say, for example, the drone attacks, the CIA's determination to actually kill as many people as they can, kill the insurgents, I am not sure if Hillary Clinton or even White House actually has any effective operational control over those decisions. And therefore, I think even if Pakistan take the risks of getting some of the Taliban and the Quetta Shura people, inducted into the negotiation process, there is really no guarantee, about the physical safety of those people who will actually be taking part in those discussions. Unless,
really?
No, because there is no guarantee that tomorrow, when all these guys are meeting, in a remote place in Afghanistan, there is not going to be a drone. That they are not ruling it out. So I think the biggest implication of fighting and negotiating with them is exactly this.
Dr. Riffat, any kind of negotiation that is hosted or facilitated by the United States, getting all these people under one roof, and if America were to attack that, that would destroy America's credibility worldwide forever.
This will not take place in Afghanistan. They'll take place in the Gulf or maybe
no. For example, we know that let me take you back.
Though the Afghans are no stranger to this kind of
Raymond
behavior. Davis.
Within less than 12 hours after the negotiated, release of Raymond Davis, CIA launched a drone strike in which, sort of 40 people, more than 40 people got killed.
Died, yeah.
And now you have the American ambassador through WikiLeaks telling us that he actually did everything to prevent the CIA from launching that attack, and it didn't happen. So there is virtually no guarantee that CIA will not subvert this process. So I think
the idea of a rogue CIA is more scary than the idea of a rogue ISI, for that matter. Don't mean to be flippant, because these are serious issues, but sometimes I think perhaps I cover my fears with my flippancy. Mr. Ezdi, how committed is America to really forging a sustained, or rather I should say sustainable, peace process in Afghanistan? Because it would be too easy to make a house of cards that will collapse the next storm blows through.
The Americans want to be able to say that they won the war in Afghanistan, and it is in their interest to have an agreement which gives them an honorable exit.
So that's it.
So
that's going to be the only thing they want.
This is precisely what they want. They want an agreement which will enable them to say, well, we won this war and we're coming back honorably with our soldiers back. Not all of them.
And the big bad wolf comes along and goes, and the whole house of cards collapses, and the Americans are going to say what? Sorry, oops.
Well, the Americans will leave behind about 20,000 troops. Maybe
that's not going to be.
That might not be enough.
I'm sorry to do this, but all I can think of is Saigon and helicopters plucking people off the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul.
That the time could well come. This could well happen in Afghanistan as well. But for the present, they are focused on bringing this war to the conclusion in the next 2-3-4 years, to withdraw their troops, to proclaim victory, enable Obama to win the election. And in that kind of a plan, they have to be somewhat serious in having these talks, and I think they're quite serious in having talks with the Taliban.
I think the consensus in Washington is that, and partly it was reflected also in the Lisbon Agreement document, in which they said that the withdrawal will be condition-based withdrawal. So I think the Americans will continue to assess the situation as it evolves, and if certainly the ground troops presence will be reduced, substantially reduced, but special ops bases, special forces, drone attacks, these are going to be the choice instruments that the Americans are going to use to continue to try to weaken the opposition if it becomes too strong.
So you feel that America is actually going to escalate drone strikes and
that's exactly my fear.
That's your fear.
And that's where the money is going. And now the Americans are now investing even in drone technology, which is much more lethal than the technology that we have seen so far.
Mr. Ezdi, one more point that I think it's really important to think about. I mean, what you gentlemen are basically saying is that America is looking at short-term exit strategies, short-term solutions, keeping options open. So should we at this point be thinking more long-term for ourselves? And if so, what should we be thinking for and planning for?
The Americans also have a long-term plan, and that plan is to make India, in a way, the guarantor of stability in this region. They want India to have a predominant role in South Asia, of course, but not just South Asia, also Central Asia.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but would India have the capacity to play that role that the Americans are asking them to play?
India has the wish, and the Americans are trying to build up the capacity for the Indians. That is a plan. It might not work out.
Let me play devil's advocate. Not that I'm a fan of India. In fact, I would probably be considered as reasonably hostile to India. But if India is going to be given the job of policeman of South Asia, how bad could that get for us?
What could be worse?
Tell us why. Tell us why.
Well, do you want to accept Indian hegemony? Do you want your independence to be compromised?
Would it be?
That's what hegemony means.
Right, because I'm being very specific here, because what I want the most for my country, I want peace in this country. I want an end to the violence. And if it means dealing with India being, the cop on the borders, so long as they stay out of my house, my country, I really don't care.
You are contradicting yourself.
Tell me how, because I feel sometimes so contradictory.
If India is the dominant power here, how can you have freedom in your country? If you want freedom, you have to be an independent sovereign state which takes its
How would our independence be compromised if India is outside our country? I mean, they can't really, they're hardly going to be blockading our ports or anything. I mean, give me an example.
If they have a heavy presence in Afghanistan and they use that presence to subvert Pakistan.
If they use that presence to subvert Pakistan. So you do fear that India's wickedness or nefariousness, you don't trust in New Delhi?
India has, for the last 65 years, single-mindedly pursued certain goals, and those goals are not going to change. That goal is to divide Pakistan. They want a weak Pakistan, they want a fragmented Pakistan, and this is not going to change. After the
I fear you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's me. I'm a hawk.
I think there are two ways of reading India's strategic intent towards Pakistan. One is, of course, is this old thing that India is an implacable enemy of Pakistan. The other is to really aren't we being our own worst enemy by internally weakening ourselves and propping up forces which actually pose a far greater danger to the survival and security of Pakistan than the Indian forces.
But we are getting out of the frying pan into the fire.
No. I think as far as Pakistan's existential security is concerned, let's not forget that we not only have a conventionally strong army, but we are also a nuclear weapons state. So you cannot really establish your hegemony, vis-a-vis a nuclear armed neighbor. I think that reality has now sunk with the Indians. So therefore, the Indians, they can throw their weight around in Maldives or in Sri Lanka or even Bangladesh, but India has to learn to.
They've invaded Sri Lanka. They have invaded.
But look what happened
Nepal,
to them. Look what happened to them when they sent their peacekeeping forces in Sri Lanka.
Yep.
They took thousands of casualties, and then they withdrew. And then they've
invaded the Maldives, they've invaded Nepal, they blockaded.
India is a large country,
but
so is Pakistan. We are the 5th largest country in the world, and we'll be in 25 years the 4th largest country in the world. So we shouldn't look upon ourselves as a small country vis-a-vis India.
Exactly.
And we can't accept Indians.
But I'm hoping that somewhere in all this, and I'm going to have to make this a last thought because I'm out of time, that someday we can stop looking at India as an enemy And
No,
can they stop looking at us as the enemy?
I mean, they are obsessed with Pakistan.
They're obsessed.
More than we are obsessed with them.
No, so are we. I mean, so are we. I mean,
But
you know, sort of
I think
we have an India fixation, and
know,
unless
Dr.
unless really we get out of this fixation, we will not be able to pay. You know, put our money where our mouth is, which is
what? This is
It's
a
not a
topic
fixation.
that I'm going to ask both of you to come back on. We need to talk very openly and honestly about what we want from India, what we think India can do, because I see a fixation in India about Pakistan. I mean, sometimes it drives me nuts when they're fixating on things and I'm like, huh, what? But so, you know, we'll talk about that because I'm out of time. But today, I do really want to thank both of you for having joined me here today, Dr. Riffat Hussain and Mr. Asif Ezdi. Thank you so much for having joined me today to at least discuss the relationship between Pakistan and America. And I think we all agree that some improvement, but more work needs to be done. All right. And that is all we have from Witness for tonight. We did explore a huge range of topics, of course, because this was a significant meeting. It was important. My own gut instinct after this was that I think it went over a lot better than I'd anticipated. I'd expected a lot more finger wagging and sort of the, you know, now, stop it kind of thing from Secretary Clinton. That didn't happen. That's good. And I think Pakistan was probably more aggressive in presenting that statement. So at least it's good to hear that the strategic dialogue is going to be back in place and the relationship is now on more of an even keel. And we all have to make certain, particularly Washington and Islamabad, to not disrupt this process over and over again. We don't need these kind of ups and downs in a very, very tenuous situation. Quatrina saying Khuda Hafiz from Islamabad.